Morning, I'm going to go through some of the adjunct therapies that we talked about in the earlier two videos. Adjunct therapies for COVID infection, for prevention, and for phase 1 infection. A couple things before I get started. Phase 1 infection would be categorized as the phase of infection where you're symptomatic and you're not requiring any supplemental oxygen. Phase 2 would be requiring supplemental oxygen. Phase 3 would be requiring mechanical ventilation. We went over some of those things in the earlier talk. So just as a brief means of condensing the original talks into something much shorter. We won't be able to cover everything, of course. The last talks were a condensing of a lot of the other things that I went over myself. So this is scratching the surface of the surface that we scratched before, but just as a way of making a really short video for you guys. So let me get to the right screen here. First things that we talked about were a few definitions. SARS is a condition that's happened. This happened back in the early 2000s. It's sudden acute respiratory syndrome. SARS-CoV-1 was the virus that caused SARS back in the early 2000s, and today we are dealing with the SARS-CoV-2, and that is resulting in the COVID-19 infections. So just a little bit of the straightening out the medical jargon there. 4 things to know about what's happening in your body during a SARS-CoV-2 infection. The number one thing to remember is your interferon, which is a cytokine that is important in your immune system communication and in interfering with viral replication. That interferon is suppressed when you have a COVID-19 infection. It's suppressed by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And that is one of the reasons why when it's not treated early, it can progress pretty rapidly into those phases where you require oxygen or even mechanical ventilation. And that's mostly due to the infection is somewhat of what is triggering it. The cytokine storm right here, cytokine storm is what would be cytokine storm is the immune system going haywire, so to speak, and the immune system is actually what's attacking the body and causing the tissue death of the lungs and so forth. So all of that is preventable with early treatment. It's very important to start therapies, to start treatment, not even waiting until you have symptoms, but start some of the things that we go over before you have symptoms to better position and optimize your immune system beforehand. And then there's many things you can do on the first onset of symptoms, even before you know it's COVID. There's things that you can do to slow down that viral replication and get a jump on it before that interferon suppression happens, before you progress into phase 2 or phase 3 where you need supplemental oxygen or where you need mechanical ventilation. And phase 1 is a phase where if you do go and get tested, you don't need oxygen. The standard treatment now is just to go home and quarantine. So you're going to be at home anyway, do a lot of these things to help prevent you from having to go to the hospital. The other thing that is significant with SARS-CoV-2 infection is the ACE2 receptors are the receptors in the cells that it is adhering to, and that's what allows the mRNA from the virus to get into your cells and then to start replicating. So the ACE2 receptors are primarily located. You have quite a bit of ACE2 receptors in your bowels, in your gut. You have quite a bit in your lungs, quite a bit in your heart as well, and your vasculature system. So the place that this is manifesting most in a long-term infection would be in the lungs. The ACE2 receptors in the lungs are most prevalent in the outer and lower, the distal areas of the lungs. And that's significant when we talk about the heat therapy, being able to get that heat, that really, really high heat, just through the skin, the layers of the tissue to the outer parts of the lungs can be very effective in really slowing and inhibiting that viral replication that would be happening without inhibition otherwise due to the interferon suppression. So moving on from those 4 points, the immune system is made up of a lot of different parts, and most of the social distancing, hand washing, masking, all of that is geared towards decreasing your exposure load when and if you are exposed to the virus. The skin is one of your biggest mechanical or structural parts of your immune system, that barrier. The innate immune system is what we focus on. It's non-specific. It's the first responder, so to speak, of your immune system. And if you do not have an intact innate immune system, your outcomes will not be as good. The active part of your immune system is antigen specific. That has to do with antibodies. All 4 of these parts of your immune system, and these aren't the total of all of the parts of your immune system, but these are just 4 that we touched on. All 4 of these parts work together, and one of these parts by itself will never be as good as all of these parts working together. The innate part is what we're focusing on because this is the part that has been largely left out over the past 18 months or so. This is the part that can be effective. If it is optimized, it can be effective in boosting or rather optimizing and synchronizing all these parts of your immune system so you have a shorter course of illness and a lower severity of illness if and when you do get sick, if and when you do get COVID. The active part of the immune system, that is dealing with antibody production. That's only just one of many things. It's antigen specific, meaning it has to do with the specific pathogen or the specific virus that has been identified by the innate part of the immune system. The vaccine is operational in the realm of the active part of your immune system in making those antibodies. For the specific strain that the mRNA is programmed for. We had this some analogy we looked at. We won't really go through that now, but this is a real great short little video going through the complexities of the immune system, and it really shows how all the parts work together. I can put a link in the description for that video for those of you who want to see that. I'll also link down in the description below part 1 and part 2 if you want to get more in depth with this. Now, again, we are just looking at a very, very small piece of everything that is out there in regards to treatments and therapies. We're focusing on phase 1, the phase where you would not be requiring oxygen, where you would be at home, be quarantined, and maybe fluids, maybe taking a fever reducer. Those are some of the typical things. However, we'll see that taking a fever reducer is not the best thing for slowing down the viral replication. Now, a lot of these studies that we looked at were the reason why I chose some of them. I chose some that were the most studied, most overlooked as far as the therapies, not the studies themselves, but the therapies that we look at are very well studied, They're most overlooked, most accessible, most effective for phase one. Many of them are randomized controlled trials, the gold standard for research and studying things out. So those are just a few of the selection criteria that I had when I was choosing what to narrow this down to. Again, small portion. We're just looking at a very small portion. The therapies, these are the therapies that we go through. We look at forest bathing, which is the name that's used in the literature, medical literature. Really, it's just spending time in fresh air. And looked at humidified essential oil air. We looked at rest, daily and weekly rest. Talked about sleep robbers, caffeine being one of the biggest sleep robbers. Screen time before bed, one of the other biggest sleep robbers, both with highly addictive properties. We looked at nutrition, also the heat therapy, hot air and saunas, exercise. Everybody knows exercise improves and optimizes your immune system. So we only looked at one study on that. We looked at iodine swishing, nutraceuticals, and trust in the divine creator who has created all of these health laws really for us to be blessed by. And the good thing about all of these therapies is they don't discriminate, whether your worldview includes a loving creator God or whether your worldview does not include that. These will still be effective if you exercise a little bit of faith that you need to put these into practice and to give them a try. So as we went through these, we're not going to go through all of these, but just to look at these briefly. This was the first one. We looked at the effects of forest bathing trips on human immune function. They were measuring the five of the enzymes that activate your natural killer cells, and all 5 of these enzymes were significantly elevated after spending 3 days. It was a 3-day, 2-night trip to the forest, and they spent a couple hours a day in the forest. So breathing that fresh air can help optimize your immune system, help optimize the natural killer cells, not just optimize, but increase the activity. They went further to put this into a randomized controlled trial. They were also looking at anti-cancer proteins in this case. And then they were wondering if inhaling essential oils from the trees would have the same effect as actually being in the forest, and it did. It had the same activating effect, increasing those 5 enzymes. Effects of temperature and relative humidity on coronavirus. Coronavirus is more rapidly inactivated at 40 degrees Celsius. When my fever was about 38.5 when I had COVID, and I let it ride, monitoring it closely to make sure it didn't get too high or dangerously high, and that was really inhibiting. Although I didn't get up to 40, that was my body's way of slowing down the viral replication, and I did a lot of other things to help support my body in that effort, and the severity of disease for me was very low, and I was off work. I took 4 days off work. Took a little bit more time to recover. I had some other days that were already scheduled off, but after a week, I was back at work. This one, fever management, evidence versus current practice. This article highlights how the current practice of managing fever is really behind the times. It goes over a lot of the evidence that shows benefits of fever and what that does. I will try to put a link to all of these studies in the description so you can go look at them. Fever, thermal regulation on immunity, the immune system feels the heat, all of these things, and then there's different heat delivery methods. There's much study that's been done on sauna bathing and the incidence of common colds. Sauna bathing may reduce the risk of pneumonia in middle-aged Caucasian men. This was quite a big reduction in that incidence. The effect of cold showering on health and work. This is due to hot shower and then alternating with cold water. This was a randomized controlled trial. The results showed 29% reduction in sickness in the group that did the hot and cold. And the hot and cold just with water is probably one of the weakest ways to transmit or transfer that heat and that cold. And even though it's one of the weakest ways, still 29% reduction in sickness. If you are actually symptomatic with something, especially with COVID, you want to do more than just the cold shower. You'd want to do heat on the chest in the form of fomentation. You'd want to do a dry sauna, breathing in that hot air. And the air in a sauna is probably usually much hotter than 40 degrees Celsius. So if you're breathing that air in, very highly effective in inactivating any virus, whether it's SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1. Viruses are much less viable at those high heat levels. And if you're in a sauna breathing in that hot air 1 time a week or 5 times a week, as we saw in the study that we looked at in the first videos, or the second video, that the incidence much lower in those. Frequent sauna bathing may reduce the risk of pneumonia in middle-aged Caucasian men. This is where they saw a large decrease in that for those who were doing frequent sauna bathing. More heat therapy ones, we don't have time to go through all these. This was the one about physical fitness, reducing the incidence of upper respiratory tract infections, and results, upper respiratory tract infections during the 12-week period was significantly reduced. 43% in subjects reporting exercising 5 days a week or more, compared to those who were largely sedentary. So 46% reduction just in this study with exercise. We all know exercise optimizes your immune system and keep you healthier. Can povidone iodine gargling mouth rinse inactivate SARS-CoV-2? Short answer is yes. This is a study that looked at that. My understanding is this is somewhat of a standard in dental practices who are mitigating or lowering the risk of transmission. This was from the Japanese Dental Science Review. Povidone iodine is used all the time, every day, for a cleanser. You can use a mouth rinse as well, just like I think they did a study with Listerine that was still effective, but not as effective as the povidone iodine. So this study is one of the most important ones. This goes back to the nutraceuticals that we looked at on our PowerPoint. Nutraceuticals, that's just the research jargon for things such as vitamin D, zinc, quercetin, and vitamin C. Zinc is toxic to coronavirus and will kill coronavirus. However, the coronavirus, when the coronavirus replication is happening inside the cell, so the zinc has to be able to get inside the cells to be effective in killing the new viruses. And the way that zinc gets into the cells is quercetin. Quercetin, a good source of quercetin is actually apples. Although if you have an active infection, you would probably have to eat way too many apples to get an optimal amount. However, if you're just on a daily basis, if you're just trying to get a daily amount, apples would not be a bad source. They're definitely not the highest source. I believe elderberries are a good source as well, but that's important in getting the zinc into your cells. Vitamin D is also very, very important in your immune system because vitamin D helps your immune system build a wall basically around the invading pathogen out of what's called cathelicidins. It builds this wall, encapsulates the pathogen, and then your body can take care of it, kill it, and eradicate it, and basically get it out of the way. So this study looked at mortality risk, COVID-19 specifically, mortality risk correlating inversely with vitamin D status. They looked at vitamin D status and the mortality rates. And, this is a perfect example of something that is well known, vitamin D, well known to be an essential building block of your immune system function, something that we already know, but that has not initially been widely publicized, or people have not been widely educated on it, and not just initially, but throughout this pandemic as well. So they looked at D3 levels, they looked at COVID-19 mortality rates, and the results of this study were, I'll have the link in the description so you can read it yourself, but one of the biggest things is that down here, now this study was done before the vaccine was available. This study illustrates that at a time when the vaccine was not yet available, patients with sufficiently high D3 levels preceding the infection were highly unlikely to suffer a fatal outcome. The partial risk at this D level seemed to vanish under normal statistical mortality risk for a given age and in light of the given comorbidities. So this correlation should have been good news when the vaccination was not available, but instead it was widely ignored. Now, vitamin D is not the only thing that's widely ignored in this. All of these other therapies are widely ignored, widely effective, widely studied, widely published in the medical literature. So this is why I'm taking the time to try to bring more attention to these, because of the effectiveness of it. Now, the new variant is the Omicron variant. There's speculation as to how virulent or how dangerous it might be, how many mutations it might have, how different it might be, how it may or may not be covered, or may or may not be susceptible to the prior vaccines. And whether it's this variant or another variant that comes up, or whether it's another disease that comes up, these therapies are going to become more importantly simple therapies as we have supply chain issues, whether it's supply chain issues with existing medications or existing vaccines, whether it's manufacturing and production issues with things, or whether it's effectiveness issues. We're going to have a greater need for these simple, effective things. Back in 2014, one of the big hot topics was the Ebola. If you want to read further on one of my prior professors, Dr. David DeRose, he wrote a nice little book, Evading Ebola. This was back in 2014. This goes over even more than what I've covered, of course, but it's geared toward a Ebola. There's some really great things that you can learn in there. I would recommend that book. But again, many of these things widely effective, widely ignored. The effects of sleep deprivation on response to immunization. Now, I don't have this one on here. I summarized it on our PowerPoint here. So if you're sleep deprived, you're not going to have an optimal immune response to an immunization. This looked at 2 groups. Test group, their bedtime was restricted. They were getting very small amount of sleep every night. And the result was the mean antibody titers in the sleep deprived group at the day 10 mark was less than half of those in the control group who were not sleep deprived. So if you want your immune system to be able to make a good amount of antibodies, you need to get enough sleep. You need to be getting enough sleep. Now this would hold true not just in immunization case, but in a natural infection case too. Your body's not going to all of a sudden be able to be sleep deprived and mount a really good immune response in a natural infection if you're sleep deprived, and then not be able to do that with a vaccine infection. Not a vaccine infection, but a vaccine versus infection. So either way, sleep is important, whether you have a natural infection or whether you are vaccinated. Sleep is going to be important to get that proper immune system response with all of the areas, all of the parts of your immune system working together. Now, this study actually doesn't apply to the mRNA technology because that works through a different mechanism. That is the mRNA goes into your cell and has your cells replicate those antibodies specific to that spike protein in the case of SARS-CoV-2. And so your body has basically and essentially a huge bolus dose of the antibodies that you're producing. And my understanding is that independent of this sleep. However, it's not including all the other parts of your immune system. And so that's why if you look at any of the studies, the immunity for that and the antibody titers for that, they're not durable, and they're not robust in the sense that they're not spanning the different variants. They're not variant independent. They're specific to that exact spike protein that the RNA was coded for, and not specific to other ones that have mutations on the spike protein or mutations in other areas. So all the more reason why sleep is important, so the other arms of your immune system, the innate part of your immune system, can be optimized and active. And with that, those are the sleep deprived and controlled subjects. With that, the only other thing that we haven't talked about is trust in the divine creator. One of the important things to note is the Handbook on Religion and Health, one of Oxford. This is published by Oxford University Press. There's a couple great chapters in there. One is religion and stress. One is religion and immunity. And this is not looking at specific denomination of religion. It's looking at people's intrinsic religiosity, meaning how much religious practices do people have? Not necessarily how much, but how meaningful do people have meaningful religious practices that increase their hope and are inspiring to them? And are they based on true principles like self-sacrificing love, truth, altruistic love. Those types of principles are inspiring and life-giving, and it really connects there's over 1,000 studies in that book, and specifically the chapters about stress, religion. Religion buffers stress's negative effects, and one of the mechanisms of that is when you are more stressed, cortisol levels increase. Cortisol levels have an immunosuppressant effect, and therefore your immune system is not going to be working as well when you are under high levels of stress with low amount of tools for coping with that stress. And trusting in a loving God who really cares about us is extremely and physiologically helpful in combating infections. And the fear that is associated with COVID, one of the reasons in doing all this is the fear that is associated with COVID is extremely out of control. Really, I have patients that are extremely fearful. And when you know all of these things that we've gone over, and when you know the effectiveness of them, and when you know that you don't have to be dependent on the supply chain, you don't have to have your hands tied while you're waiting for a therapy or a drug to come out, you are just removed from that fear. And that doesn't mean we don't take this seriously. I take COVID very seriously. I take care of patients in many different units in the hospital. I'm in the ICU, I'm in the ER, I'm in many different units. I see how sick patients get with COVID, and I asked them, what were you doing from when you just had symptoms until when you came to the hospital? What were you doing at home? I'm just very curious to hear what they're doing, and none of them know about this. None of them are doing these things, and their disease is progressing to the point where they're in phase 2, phase 3, needing oxygen or have had to be on a ventilator, and it's not a place that any of us want to have to go. And implementing these principles ahead of time can do so much in helping with that. And the fear that is associated with COVID, there's really no need for that. When you look at these principles that are available, this can really give people the opportunity to come down from that fear and have a healthy respect for this virus, and a healthy respect, not necessarily focused on the virus, but a healthy respect for our immune system. Our immune system is fearfully and wonderfully made. Truly, the complexities of it are very endless, and I would encourage you to replace, if you are someone who's been afraid of COVID, look at all of these studies, look at the links, follow the links to all of these studies. And if you understand the powerfulness of this, we looked at a few of what's out there, that exercise. We looked at a few things of what's out there, and the combining of all of these together is what's really powerful. If you're able to combine even just 2 of these, you're going to be much better off than what you're doing now. We don't need to have irrational fear of coming down with COVID. We can practice these simple and research-based, these methods that are studied out, and we can live in such a way where we have a healthy respect for getting sick, for having COVID, but it's not a crippling fear that is overcoming and overtaking all sectors of our life. And that's really my reason in taking the time to go through compiling all this together in a way that I can hopefully share it in a meaningful way. So the power, in closing, the power of combination therapy is really what makes all of this even more powerful. We looked at exercise. There was a 43% reduction in upper respiratory illness. Vitamin D levels, we saw highly unlikely to suffer a fatal outcome from COVID-19. Hot and cold showers, 29% reduction in sickness. Each one of these has been shown, proven to lower and reduce incidence of sickness or severity of sickness. When you combine all of these together, the effects are more powerful than anything else that you can do. Zinc, quercetin, vitamin C, daily rest. We saw that in the twice the amount of antibodies in the rest group. Weekly rest in the form of forest bathing. Weekly rest is really important. And the thing I didn't mention in these antibodies, not the antibodies, they were measuring the 5 enzymes that activated the natural killer cells. The enzymes were elevated up to 7 days after the initial intervention, which was the fresh air, the breathing of the fresh air. So there's a reason why we were created to have the week, the 7-day week. In history, there has been times where there's a 5-day week that was tried and a 10-day week. And if you're interested in reading about those, they're pretty fascinating. Pretty fascinating what happens when the 7-day week is changed. There's a reason why we have that circumception rhythm, that 7-day rhythm, and we were created in the garden, and we were meant to be breathing fresh air. That's one of the important things that we can do. So I would encourage you, we also looked at the heat sauna hydrotherapy, very, very powerful. When you combine all of these together, there's no need to be afraid. There's many more therapies in addition to these. These are just the ones that are easily accessible, that are not dependent on the supply chain, that are not prescription oriented. You don't need a prescription for any of these. Sorry about that. Most accessible. All you have to do is you have to have a home that has water. You have to have, food and things like that in order to get some of these. But they're extremely simple. This is really promoting your own personal resiliency. So I would encourage you to replace the fear of COVID with a fear and respect and appreciation of the Creator God who's given us all of these therapies. And like I said, these therapies don't discriminate whether or not your worldview includes religion or God. I encourage you to step out in faith, follow the links in the description, go look at the research and try some of these. You will be better positioned to be well, not just in regards to SARS-CoV-2 or a COVID-19 infection, but in regards to anything else that comes along. Your body will be better positioned for that. So I hope this shorter version, although we didn't get into much detail, but I hope this shorter version is more digestible for those who don't have as much time. And when you do have more time, follow the links in the description. You can watch the other videos, or you can go look at all the studies. Please leave a comment leave a comment below if you have any questions, if you have any comments, and I will respond as I can. I wish you all good health.